You ever look around your neighborhood, you see a pothole-ridden street, or maybe an overcrowded hospital, and you just wonder, why isn't the government doing something? Or maybe, why are they doing that? It can all feel pretty random, kind of chaotic, right?
Well, what if I told you there's actually a map for all that seeming chaos? Yeah, a surprisingly logical process that can take a problem from just a local complaint all the way up to becoming a national policy. So let's dive in and actually trace that journey together.
Okay, first things first, let's get our terms straight. When we say public policy, we're not talking about politics. Politics is the whole game of winning power. Policy, that's what happens after the election. It's literally the government in action. It's all the choices, and sometimes the choice not to act, that the state makes to deal with public problems.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to walk through 6 stages: how a policy gets born, how it gets on the government's agenda, how they pick a solution, how they put it into action, how they measure if it worked, and finally, why it's a cycle that never really ends. All right, let's get started.
All right, section 1. So where does this whole thing even start? Look, not every problem out there gets the government's attention, right? For a policy to even have a chance, a situation has to make this massive leap. It has to go from being just a private trouble to being seen as a public problem, something that affects all of us and needs a collective solution.
And this is our map, the public policy cycle. Now, it might look like a simple circle, but don't let that fool you. This model is our guide to understanding the entire life of a policy, all the way from a basic idea to its real-world impact.
Okay, so once a problem is officially stamped as public, it enters this fierce race for attention. You've got to remember, there are thousands of issues all fighting for a tiny sliver of the government's time and money.
I mean, just think about the scale of this. The list of things that could be problems is basically infinite. But the government's actual to-do list, their agenda, it's really, really small. So the big question is, how does any single problem actually win this race and get noticed?
And this quote really nails the core challenge here. The hard part isn't knowing what the problems are. The real difficulty is putting them in order. It's about deciding what's most important, what's most urgent, and frankly, what's politically possible to even try and fix right now.
So how does this ordering happen? Well, a political scientist named John Kingdon developed this brilliant model to explain it. It's called the multiple streams framework. And his big idea was that for a problem to actually make it onto the agenda, 3 totally separate streams have to converge at the perfect moment. When they do, they open up what he called a policy window.
So what are these 3 streams he's talking about? Okay, first you've got the problem stream. This is when something gets people's attention. Maybe some alarming new data, a big crisis that's all over the news, or just feedback showing an old program isn't working. Then there's the solution stream. This is the world of experts, academics, all the brainy people who have been cooking up and debating possible solutions for years. And finally, you have the politics stream. This is all about the public mood, what happened in the last election, or maybe a powerful group pushing for change. It's the political weather, so to speak.
Let's make this real with an example. Imagine the problem is rising childhood obesity. The problem stream starts flowing when scary new health reports come out. Meanwhile, the solution stream is already there. Experts have been talking about soda taxes and school sports programs for ages. Then, the politics stream lines up perfectly because the public is getting worried and politicians sense it's time to act. When those 3 things all click into place, bam! A policy window swings open, and suddenly, childhood obesity is a top priority.
Okay, so the problem's on the agenda. That policy window is wide open. So, now what? Well, now the government has to figure out what to actually do about it. And this, my friends, is where the clean, perfect idea of how policy should be made just smacks right into messy, complicated reality.
In a perfect world, they'd use what's called the rational model. Just picture a supercomputer that analyzes every single possible option, calculates all the costs, all the benefits, and spits out the one single perfect solution. Yeah, right. Reality is almost never like that. What usually happens is they use the incremental model. This means they make small tweaks, little adjustments to policies that are already on the books. Think evolution, not revolution.
And you can see that whole spectrum of models right here. On one side, you have that perfect, logical supercomputer model. And way over on the other end, you have something called the garbage can model, which is pretty much what it sounds like. It's where problems, solutions, and people are all just jumbled together chaotically, and a decision gets made almost by accident. The key takeaway, though, is that most real-world decisions land somewhere in the middle, much closer to that step-by-step, incremental approach.
So let's bring it back to our childhood obesity example. Instead of trying to invent some brand new massive health system from scratch, which is super hard, the incremental approach is much more likely.
They'd probably combine a couple of ideas by just tweaking what's already there. Add a new tax on soda using the existing tax code, and maybe beef up sports programs within the current school system. It's just more practical and way easier to get done politically.
So a decision's been made. A law is signed. We're done. Success, right? Not so fast. Now comes what's often the hardest, most expensive, and longest part of the whole process, implementation. This is where the rubber meets the road stage, and it's where a fantastic idea on paper can completely fall apart in the real world.
And when it comes to implementation, you've basically got two main ways of thinking about it. First is top-down. Think of this like a command from the main office. The central government makes a clear rule, and everybody on the front lines just has to follow it. The other way is bottom-up, which is the total opposite. It gives the people on the ground, the teachers, the local officials, the doctors, the freedom and flexibility to figure out the best way to make the policy work in their specific community.
Implementation isn't just one thing either. It happens on different levels. It all starts with the big strategic plan. That's the high-level vision. That big plan gets broken down into more specific programs. And then those programs are actually put into action through individual projects. They're real, on-the-ground, concrete tasks, like actually building a new school cafeteria.
Let's connect this back to our obesity policy. That soda tax, that's a classic top-down move. The government says there's a tax, and every single store has to collect it. Simple. But the new school sports program, that's got to be more bottom-up. You're really counting on the creativity and judgment of individual teachers and principals to come up with activities that will actually engage their students.
Okay, so the policy is up and running. Money is being spent, people are busy, but the biggest question of all is still hanging out there. Is any of this actually working? And that brings us to the really critical final stages, monitoring and evaluation. This is where the policy gets its report card.
And I absolutely love this analogy from the source material because it makes the difference crystal clear. Think of it like a road trip. Monitoring is like checking your dashboard while you're driving. You're looking at your speed, your fuel, making sure everything's running smoothly. It answers the question, are we doing what we planned? Evaluation, on the other hand, is like taking the car to the mechanic after the trip for a full inspection. It answers the much bigger question, did we actually get where we wanted to go?
So how do you judge success? Well, evaluation usually boils down to these three key E's. First up is efficiency. Basically, did we use our resources wisely? Did we get the most bang for our buck? Second is efficacy. This one's simple. Did we hit our specific goals? If the target was to vaccinate 1 million people, did we actually do it? And last but most important is effectiveness. Did the policy actually fix the bigger problem? So not just did we vaccinate people, but did disease rates actually go down in a meaningful, lasting way? That right there is the ultimate test.
And that brings us all the way to our final and maybe most important point. This whole policy cycle, it isn't a straight line with a finish line called evaluation. Nope. It's a continuous loop. It's all about action, learning, and then adapting.
So we're right back where we started, looking at our map. See, the results from an evaluation almost never just come back with a simple stamp of success or failure. What usually happens is they uncover new problems, or they show that the solution needs to be tweaked. And all of that new information, it feeds right back into the very beginning, into that problem stream, and kicks off the entire cycle all over again. It's a process of constantly trying to get it right.
So from now on, when you see a new government policy being debated on the news, you've got the map. You can actually trace its journey. You can ask yourself, okay, where is this thing in the cycle right now? Did a policy window just open for it? What kind of implementation challenges is it going to face? Is anyone even talking about how they're going to measure success? Understanding this cycle does more than just make sense of the chaos. It genuinely empowers you to be a smarter, more informed citizen. So, what are you going to see now that you have the map?